Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Emily St. John Mandel, author of Sea of Tranquility, which was published last year, released in paperback just 2 days ago. Oh, listen to her talk at the Free Library of Philadelphia. You missed it, but it was 2 days ago. And I'm kind of peeved at Emily simply because the front of our bookstore still has Station 11, Glass Hotel, and now this one, I don't have room between that and Madeline Miller. I have no room for anything. And George Saunders. Anyway, so yeah, the last time we spoke was amazingly back in 2014, right after the publication of Station 11, before it became what it became, winning so many awards, the HBO series, and as I said, flying off the front table on the shelves of our book. And the interesting thing is, one of the kind of, not precepts, but one of the kind of conceits of the book is that Emily first thought of it in the sense of an exercise in autofiction to a certain extent. I call it like a pre-post-apocalyptic novel. And I always wondered about the post part because since the apocalypse is the destruction of everything, at least in the Greek sense, well, there couldn't be anything after to talk about.
Right. It's a good point. It's like we need a new word. It's more like a,
yeah.
I don't know, like a 3/4 apocalypse, an 80% apocalypse.
Well, you did it. That's what you did. But I
I
don't,
did.
yeah, I don't really look at the book in that fashion. I look at it as a book about glimpses, about the way of I wake up every morning and go, what the hell is this? What am I in? You know, but the way it explains this is just like, it's just like a glitch, or maybe this really is a simulation, or like kind of like in the Matrix when Neo sees the black cat and says, hey, that's like deja vu, and everyone goes into DEFCON 1.
I love that moment when he's like, yeah, just deja vu. And they were like, wait, was it the same black cat? It's like, yeah, chill.
And everyone goes, oh, shit.
Yeah.
So, and the way this glitch works, and again, I got to be careful with a lot of the book because there's spoilers, which always tells me it's a good book. But, you have 4 timelines going through several centuries and characters that somehow all of them encompass a feeling like I just described about not being sure. And then that unsureness is underscored by something that happens, which makes it different than our quotidian world. And then the rest of their lives, they have to worry about it. But anyway, the auto part of it begins with the first sentence of the novel, when you find a St. John and a St. Andrew, which is a lot of baggage to carry around.
It's a lot of baggage. That was, yeah. That character. Go ahead.
This is you. If you don't watch it, I'll just do all the talking. So sorry.
All right. Yeah. Tell me what I can cut in.
So anyway, the reason I liked St. Andrew is because he's really lazy like me. He's just like, he's
you
really
felt seen by that character.
Yeah. And, there's a couple of characters that have that same indolence or fecklessness, where it's not that they are lazy, they're just not sure of what they're supposed to do, what purpose they have. And when you first wrote the first part, and you talked about it a little bit at the library, how did that come about? Because it's not the novel, it's like something you thought of before the novel, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the backstory in Sea of Tranquility. A few months before the COVID-19 pandemic, so I'm going to say like November, December 2019. I can't believe how much time has passed. I had started playing around with autofiction, which for any listeners who don't know the term, autobiographical fiction. So fiction that's just, a little more obviously based on the life of the writer, because I think we do inevitably bring our own lives into our fictional characters. what that came out of was I'd had this epic tour for Station 11. There were, I think, 127 events in 7 countries over 14 months. So I was just on the road in a very intense, extended way. I'd go back home for a few weeks and then go out for a few weeks and kind of toggle back and forth. Um, and I actually really like touring, and I really like doing book events, especially after all these years of Zooms. It's so nice to just get to talk to people. Um, but although I would say probably 99% of my interactions on the road are great, that leaves a lot of other interactions. If you do a ton of events, then that 1% does add up. I'm just going to say. So I'd had these kind of surreal experiences while traveling in the service of a book. By surreal, I mostly mean sexist, and that word surreal is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. And I kind of wanted to write about it. And I like autofiction as a form. I really admire Rachel Cusk's work, the British author. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just kind of play around with the form a little bit while I kind of figure out what my next book's going to be. So I was writing these fragments about an autobiographical character on the road in the service of a pandemic novel. And then an actual pandemic broke out. So in March 2020, I published The Glass Hotel. And that was just such a horrible time, like for all of us. I was in New York City for the duration. So those early spring months were very intense. And I remember feeling like it might actually be good for my sanity to immerse myself in the world of a novel, because that's a really nice diversion, I have to say. Novels are hard, but if everything around you is worse, then writing a novel can feel like a refuge. And that was how it felt to me in the spring of 2020. So I started writing this strange novel about a time traveling detective, Sea of Tranquility. And then once I realized that it was going to be a time travel book, which is something I'd wanted to do for a while because it sounds fun, I had to pick the timelines. So okay, I wanted that 1912 timeline you just alluded to with Edwin St. John, who's named, by the way, after a great grandfather of mine, Newell St. Andrew St. John, who came across from London in 1906 or so. So I had that timeline. And then I had the 2020 timeline because I remain kind of fascinated by that period right before the pandemic officially arrived. So say February 2020, where, look, like, we're smart people. We can read and absorb news. We knew what was coming, but we didn't believe it. It seemed kind of incongruous, and we didn't really plan for the most part. And I am kind of fascinated by that failure of imagination. So that was the first 2 timelines. Then I thought maybe I could take those weird autofiction fragments about the author on tour and make them sci-fi. I thought that would be kind of a cool experiment to just like mash those genres together and see what came out of it. So yeah, I ended up placing that author in the year 2301. She lives in a moon colony, and as we meet her, she's on this epic promotional tour in the service of a pandemic novel as an actual pandemic is breaking out. So yeah, definite elements of autobiography there.
I was in Hong Kong on February 5th of 2020.
Oh, wow.
And the airport was just full of everybody wearing masks, which I wasn't. And I'm going, this could never happen in America. And
yeah.
And then I flew back into San Francisco, and I thought, oh, well, they're going to be like, very careful, because I was going up the escalator in Hong Kong and they were taking my temperature. But then just went through customs. Like you said, nobody did anything, no mask requirement, no questions, nothing.
Yeah.
It's very American.
Yeah, it's very American. It's very careless and doesn't reflect well on us, candidly. I think culturally, a lot of Asian countries, I should say, did have an advantage there because they had been through SARS. So there was this kind of culture of masking, which in the US, we just didn't have. And I wish we had. That certainly would have saved lives. But yeah, I was just in Hong Kong, and I feel like everybody's still traumatized. It's been a rough 3 years over there.
When I adopted my daughter from China, I was in Guangzhou at the height of the SARS epidemic. So my whole life is like surrounded by these things.
Yeah.
Going back to the beginning, another concept that you talked about, and again with your great grandfather, is And I like it, the concept of a remittance man, because once again, since I'm lazy, I could just go somewhere, hang out, and get a check every month. So no one knows what
Trust
that is.
funds, like that would be amazing, right? If I, yeah, who doesn't dream of a trust fund? Who doesn't have them? Yeah, that's kind of a funny little corner of the sort of expats from the UK immigration experience around the turn of the last century. Yeah, my great grandfather was a remittance man. And the situation there was that the law in England for a very long time was that if you had an estate, any money, that whole estate had to go to the eldest son, which kind of raised the question, what do you do with your extra sons? So, my great grandfather was, let's say, a third or fourth son. He was one of the youngest kids in a fairly large family. And the solution that his parents came up with, that a lot of wealthy parents came up with at that time, was they would send the younger sons overseas to just kind of make a go of it in the new world. I think there was this kind of romantic, horribly colonial idea around, being an adventurer in a quote unquote undiscovered land, like that kind of edge to it. It was obviously an incredibly privileged kind of immigration experience. They were literally receiving a remittance or an allowance from back home. There is something kind of poignant in it, though, to me, which is that these were the most ill-prepared people, for literally anything. So, it's like, and also the extremity of immigration back then. My great-grandfather left London at 18 and never saw his family again. That's what it meant back then. Except for one sister who he saw for a visit when they were both in their 80s. But yeah, so these men who, in many cases were boys, like 18-year-olds, they would have had these beautiful classical educations. So, Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and then really absolutely zero in the way of any practical skill. So, certainly nothing like accounting or anything that would have been helpful in any kind of business. So, an example of how that played out, my great grandfather, who I think must have been kind of a hopeless romantic, had his occupation noted as farmer on the passenger manifest. I doubt the guy had ever touched a shovel. I mean, just no idea what he was getting into. And yeah, sure enough, managed to run 2 farms into the ground, one on each side of the US-Canada border. So it didn't always work out. Yeah, it just kind of interested me. I wanted to get into that period a little bit.
It reminded me, you may not be old enough, of the TV show Green Acres and Oliver Wendell Douglas, and he would get on his tractor wearing a 3-piece suit.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, I don't know if it's age though. It's like I was raised by hippies, so we didn't get a TV until I was 13. So I missed a lot of cultural references.
Probably for the better. I would like to empty my head of Kim Kardashian and have some more room for other pertinent information, but it's hard to do.
That'd be nice. Yeah, like a reality TV show memory wipe of some kind.
Yeah, just wipe it all.
Yeah,
in some ways, this book is just about a tree, an airport, an underpass, and a time machine.
And a violinist. That guy's important.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The most important. Yes, I remember someone asked the question at the library and you said, "Oh, you framed that so beautifully, so you didn't spoil it."
Yeah, it's hard to frame, but yeah.
Yeah, so if you the other interesting thing, and I think the person that was sitting with you on the stage talked about, is that, and I noticed it in one specific situation, is that you talk about she had her device. She had her device with her. And what you stayed away from was, but I know you like them, but you stayed away from the concept of, okay, I'm going to explain all the technological advances that occurred. Yeah. And what made you do that? Because it's unusual.
It is unusual. Yeah. It partly comes down to the difficulty of just trying to look ahead into the future in terms of what will our devices be. Like right now, we're in this circumstance which would have seemed nonsensical even when I was a kid, which is that our phones take pictures. Like if you told that to my 12-year-old self, it would be like, that's crazy. Like, does your blender drive your car? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's just so difficult to predict what form our personal devices will take in the future. But it actually goes back to a larger question around how deep you want to go into science fictional technology if you're writing a book that's set in the future. And I don't know that there's a wrong way to go about this. But I think I maybe occupy one extreme where I'm not that interested in getting into the weeds and how the technology works or even really what it looks like. There was a period of time when I was trying to research how time travel might work in the future, trying to apply my very limited understanding to like the quantum blockchain, where particles are entangled in space and time as well as space. And then trying to extrapolate that. But then I had this moment of realization, which is that, look, it's just transport. Like, if I'm not getting into the mechanics of how your bicycle works in 1912, do I need to explain the time machine? It's kind of my feeling. And then the other extreme, there are writers I really admire who go deep into the technology, and it's fascinating. Like Cixin Liu, Three Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and other books. He goes deep. He will describe in minute detail things like silicone farming, like just kind of these wild technologies that he invents. And it's fascinating. I'm here for it. But yeah, personally, for my books, I think I'm just more interested in the people. So I see novels as having kind of limited real estate in terms of how much time you want to spend on any given thing. And yeah, the people are always the most important to me.
Isn't it funny how President Obama picked your book and Three Body Problem?
Yeah, that means he likes both, just like
Yeah,
me.
just like
Yeah.
just like you do. Yeah, you're right, because now we actually, for a long time we weren't in the future, and now we are in the future because all this stuff actually does exist. But specifically, and today, and yesterday with Chat GPT,
Mhm.
Elon Musk himself,
Yeah.
who started it, is saying, let's stop this now before it really, really gets out of hand, which is a
Yeah,
perfect.
absolutely. I'm like, have you seen the Boston Dynamics videos with their robots from hell? They're really scary.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love those.
there's a great case to be made for putting the brakes on all of this. Yeah, Chat GPT is funny. Um, I was chatting with it the other night just as an experiment, and it tells me that my novel The Sea of Tranquility was published in 2010 and then republished in 2013 as Last Night in Montreal, which was that was my first book. It came out in 2009. So it delivers wrong answers with incredible confidence. Kind of amazing.
But you can tell it, and I just talk to it like I'm talking to a person.
Hmm.
I call it Geppetto first because that's GPT. I'm not going to keep saying Chat
Hmm.
GPT. She goes,
It's a very awkward name.
I make it Geppetta because I think it's a she. And she answers and says, I see you're calling me Geppetta. And and then I did it with you. I've done it with other authors. I said, could you write a short story in the style of Emily St. John Mandel? Try
Oh,
that.
wow.
And it
I'm going
does.
to try that. That's wild.
I know. And you can say, okay, in the style of Sea of Tranquility, or can you do it so it mashes together? And it's not you, and it's horrible, but
Right. But you see the thread there that it followed.
yeah, and you can do it with J.D. Salinger or Hemingway.
Right.
He's good. She's good at Hemingway because it's a
Oh,
lot easier.
that's cool. Okay. Yeah, Hemingway is easy to copy, but like hard to get it that good. That's
Exactly.
fascinating. I read something that explained a lot, which is that I can't remember why this is, but apparently its knowledge ends in September 2021. So then that made sense to me. I was like, okay, Sea of Tranquility didn't come out for another 7 months. That's why I was just like, um, yeah, just riffing on random book titles, literally.
If you pay $20 a month, you can move up to Chat GPT 4 from 3.5. And that gives you a little more information. But I don't know why they stopped at September 2021. They could just kept
Yeah,
feeding it data and bringing it up to date. But ask it about COVID. It doesn't know what happened. Ask it what
that's
happened.
wild.
I know. It's
Wow.
like,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I wouldn't pay $20 a month for that, but I'll go find the free version again.
I know, I'm such a sucker for stuff like that.
It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is. So when you talk about your book tour and then
Mhm.
autobiographically you replicate the book tour, and as you said the other day, 99% of it is great and
Yeah,
1% of it is really horrible, but that's the 1% you can use.
totally. Because that is actually like the crazy entertaining 1%. There's I don't know, it's funny. Maybe this is a failure that we have as a species, or maybe just me as a writer, but like it's hard to just write about really nice things and make it interesting. So, if I
Right.
describe all these absolutely pleasant interactions with people while traveling, it's like yawn. That's not the most fascinating work of fiction.
Well, yeah, like some of the authors will come and do signings, and then the question someone will say, I don't think you should have done that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you got a lot of those. And some of them you
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny with Olive, that character and that book tour section. A lot of it is fictional. Her home life is completely fictional. My daughter was saying the same dialogue that I gave to Olive's daughter around the time she was 5 in the early pandemic. But the book tour stuff is completely autobiographical. So people actually literally said all those things to me. Yeah, so again, most interactions are great, but you will have the occasional guy stand up in the audience and say, so, the death of the prophet in Station 11, why did you choose to make that such a non climactic moment? And you're like, well, you write your novel and show me how it's done, for starters. But yeah,
I would,
people have comments.
yeah, I would really tee off on those people. Yeah, you're very, well, I guess you don't have to be. You could be a real pain in the ass like they are and just come back at them, but you don't do that because you're polite. But
That's a bad look. I mean, I wouldn't do that.
yeah, no.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that, well, in some of our book clubs, which I sometimes call Fight Club, it's like,
I love that.
and yeah, and they totally argue. I think he was a horrible person. No, he has some excellent qualities. And actually, as an author, you kind of want that, don't you?
You do. You want engagement. I just had this amazing experience, which is why I was late, which I apologize again. I was unprofessional. There's this program up in Canada called Canada Reads, where 5 prominent Canadians, there was an actor, an actress, a Jeopardy champion, all these academics, like really interesting, articulate people, will come together and they'll each choose a Canadian book to champion on national television. And it's this elimination tournament where they try to convince each other to vote for their book.
That's cool.
And it's really cool. And every day one book gets voted off. So no, I didn't win. The book that won is called Ducks by Kate Beaton, which is an incredible graphic memoir. It's so moving. I'm really enjoying it. But I was watching the final round on Zoom right before we got on to this call and just thinking, what an amazing thing to have these very serious, very intelligent, committed readers debating the merits of books. Like that's something you don't see that often in our culture. So yeah, I do want that level of engagement. Like I think that really, like, for me, when I think about people say voting my book off the island, or like not liking my book or whatever it is, it's like they're not the enemy. Like not reading is the enemy. So like whatever gets people reading and engaged and talking about books, yeah, I'm fine with people not liking my work. It's, I wouldn't want that to happen at scale because I do make a living on royalty payments, but it's nice that people are engaged and that they care.
Yeah, and as a bookstore owner, I feel exactly the same way, maybe even more so because I'm extreme in it.
Mhm.
But if I can get, uh, some 12-year-old kid came up to the front counter with War and Peace, and
That's cool.
I couldn't charge him for that. I just said, take it.
I love that.
I mean,
Right.
seriously, how can you make a kid pay for that book if he's reading it at 12 years old?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love this story.
Um, so again, not spoiling it, but some of my friends like books that are, put in a box, wrapped up,
Mhm.
tied with string. And you don't write those books. You write the books that after you close it up, you're still thinking. You're still thinking. And the last line of this book does exactly that. It's even in italics, right? Yeah.
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 It might be. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like as soon as you read that, you go, oh, well, what does that mean for me? And yeah. And so like I guess I would ask you, so after you would read a book like this, would you think, and I do think that, I wonder if this is a simulation. Let me go back and think
Yeah.
about this.
But then like a fun thing about that, or was fun for me in writing this book, is that of course a novel's a simulation. you build a world and you put people in it. So it does get very meta very quickly, I have to say. And then, there's some risk of sort of, I guess, eating your own tail as a novelist, but Sea of Tranquility did kind of feel like a novel about the project of writing a novel in a way that I promise not to replicate, by the way. I'm not going to make a habit of this because I think that would be obnoxious. But yeah, it was interesting to think in terms of, maybe all of this is a simulation. What is a simulation? We live in very simulated environments in cities, just in terms of, where our airflow and water and heat come from. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean our lives are less real than, the life I lived as a child growing up in the country where, water came from a creek behind the house. And then if we lived in a dome city on the moon where the entire atmosphere was totally artificial, as well as gravity, that wouldn't be less real in a fundamental way than the lives we lead now in cities. And then to go back to that character in 1912, Edwin St. John St. Andrew, although he would have said St. John, Edwin St. John St. Andrew. He was traveling to Canada in the service of a bad idea, which is what colonialism was, and like why it was such a bloodbath and such a nightmare for Indigenous people, because there was this kind of wrong idea. And I think it varied country by country. In Canada, it was the idea of the empty land. There was just like this vast territory that, from Europeans' perspective, was empty, which of course it wasn't, and just there for the taking, which wasn't true either. So if you're traveling in the service of a bad idea like that, or a wrong idea of how the entire world works, isn't that also a kind of simulation? And then of course the novel's a simulation. And yeah, it was a really interesting line of thought for me.
It's funny because he basically got booted because of those comments he made about colonialism. He's sitting at dinner and he acts totally inappropriately.
And they're really pretty mild comments, but like the bar was low.
Yeah. But his father was appalled and he tried to back off, and then he got booted out.
He got booted out. Yeah, he got booted off the island, literally. Yeah, and in fairness, he was always going to go to Canada, but they sped up the process considerably after that dinner party.
If it was a simulation, do you think you would? Well, I've interviewed physicists, quantum and otherwise, neuroscientists, biologists, philosophers, psychiatrists, and I always ask them about solipsism, because in which case only one of us is here,
Right. Okay. And the other one's like a non-playing character in a video game?
Yeah. I mean, I have no idea if you're there or not. I mean, I just.
Right. How could you know?
No, there's no way.
Right.
But the problem, all these guys are trying to write about the seat of human consciousness, how we are self-aware. So every time I bring up solipsism, they all get pissed off because it's right out of their wheelhouse. They're coming to tell me this is the way it is. And I'm saying, what if it's this way? Because it can't be disproved.
Right. Yeah.
And in which case, well, that's the question. If it was solipsistic or a simulation, do you think morally, ethically, as far as your day-to-day life, do you think you would act any different than you act now?
I don't think so, because it's like how do you prove that it's solipsism? And you can't. So I think you have to assume that everybody around you is real. What we know from our own experiences as people is that humans feel pain. And to me, that in and of itself is the argument for kindness, and it's for being, for behaving gently toward other people and taking them into account. So that was something I found myself thinking about, which is, if we find out tomorrow that we're living in a simulation, if some definitive proof magically appears, I think the correct answer is, so what? I think honestly, we still need to treat each other well. And I think our lives still matter, even if this is all a simulation.
It reminds me of Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye, just the same as the beginning of James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist. And it's like, have you had those experiences? I have, where you just like they do in the book. It's exactly the same, where you go, oh, you don't know what it is, but it's something.
Yeah, definitely. Just that feeling of wrongness. You're like, or it just seems like slightly off for a minute.
Yeah, it happens to me a lot. And it's like, I really honestly do think and it's not that I'm a spiritual person that much, but I honestly think there's something, because you do catch it, but it's always
Yeah.
right here off your periphery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure a neurologist would say, well, your neurons are misfiring and,
Right.
in X way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't mean the experience is wrong. And you can't prove it either way.
Trying to think how to phrase this one too. I'm not going to say the book comes full circle in a way, which that's not a spoiler, but the time machine paradoxes that are always seen.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'll just skip that.
I can get into that. I can get into
Okay.
that. Okay, so I think we've already established that the simulation hypothesis is a big part of this book, and I don't think that's a major spoiler. The reason why the simulation hypothesis is in the book at all is to solve the time travel paradox. Where the problem with time travel fiction is if you think about it for 2 minutes, it totally falls apart. Just if I say that I'm going to step out of this room and into a time machine and back to 1910, then was I not then always going to step out of the room into the time machine to 1910 and kind of round and round in a circle? And that's in a novel, that kind of situation would be pretty devastating to a character's free will and also to cause and effect. And I don't know how you write a novel without those things. So, I was thinking, well, I think the only way I can solve this problem, and also to solve the problem of, if you change even one tiny thing in the past, if, say, on a given day in 1986, you ran back into your house to get the sweater you forgot, and that meant you weren't hit by a car, and then that led to X and Y and Z. Then time travel also falls apart because the timeline would crumble every time anybody went back and did literally anything.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe the way to solve those problems is to layer on this whole other layer of weirdness. And that's where the simulation hypothesis came in. So I have a character stand next to a time machine in 2401, acting as kind of an avatar for maybe my own skepticism or a skeptical reader, and say something to the effect of, we don't know why time travel works. We don't know why the timeline seems to repair itself. We don't know why this works at all. We think that the fact that it does seem to work, that the timeline does always mysteriously fix itself after a time traveler messes with it, might be evidence that we're living in a simulation. And yeah, that was the only way I could come up with to solve those problems.
Yeah, you have to come up with some type of deus machina.
Yeah,
in order to
yeah,
do it.
exactly.
But it's like, everything, everywhere, all at once, or the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, or the Ray Bradbury short story where the guy goes back and he's not supposed to step off the path and he steps on a butterfly, and then everything.
Right, the world ends.
Yeah.
Yeah,
basically, Trump is elected is what happens. There was a nice president and he comes back.
Yeah.
Trump. The most poignant scene in the book to me was the two situations in the underpass. I didn't expect that at all. And then that, of course, determines what happens to Gaspery.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was just really interesting to think about the way, like, a person, well, the way a time traveler, but really the way anybody might just have an impact on someone just by kind of appearing in their life for a minute as a child.
Yeah, plus it was scary.
Yeah, it's a little unnerving.
Yeah, and the rest of the book was never really scary. It was kind of evanescent. It was just kind of, well, especially the first experience in 1912 and under the tree, and then the first appearance of a certain guy. That was magical. And then the airport was also magical. And so then you said meta, but this isn't, and I'm not, we were talking about terms like post-apocalyptic. I love the word magical realism, but I don't think I would call this anything like magical realism, would you?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's like, I'm trying to suggest, But then we get into this really interesting line of inquiry, which is like define magic. Yeah, I'm trying to suggest potential glitches in a simulation that somebody's investigating. So I think that puts me way more in sci-fi than magical realism. But to your point, they're not mutually exclusive. That's
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. And I think Arthur C. Clarke said something like, any technology that is so as advanced as to be unable to be understood is magic.
Yeah. So we're headed toward an era of magic with AIs not writing their own code.
Yeah. Magic or black magic or
Mm-hmm.
right, the good
Yeah.
witch or the bad
Yeah.
witch.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, then the other thing that's, I don't know if this is meta or not, but you're bringing characters from the Glass Hotel back into this book.
Mm-hmm.
And what gave rise to that? I think you may have touched on that in your talk at the library, but why did you choose to put Vincent back in?
Oh yeah, the library talk was sold out, so I'm happy to get into it again. um, yeah, so when I started figuring out the timelines for this book, for Sea of Tranquility, as I mentioned, there's 1912 timeline, then there's the February 2020 timeline. And I realized, wait a minute, I have this whole cast of characters, and this book I just published, Glass Hotel, came out that month. We're very plausibly in New York City in February 2020. So I suppose it was partly just expediency that, I'd already created these people, I could bring them back. But I do really enjoy bringing back characters from book to book. It's partly that one of my core values as a writer is velocity. I really want my book to sing. It's got to move quickly. I don't want to bog it down with too much detail. And what
Right.
that means is that, sometimes I don't get as deeply into secondary characters as I'd like to, even though they interest me. And that was the case with Morella in the Glass Hotel, Vincent's best friend. So it was kind of interesting to have sections of a new book, Sea of Tranquility, that are focused on her. I get to hang out with her and get her perspective for a little bit, which we didn't before. And then bring in Vincent as a very, very secondary character. And bring back Paul, who remains insufferable, but it's kind of fun to write. So, yeah, I get attached to characters sometimes, and
Yeah. And there's still
yeah,
a
I want
lot
to spend more time with them.
a
Yeah,
lot of edges of those characters that can be easily amplified in another work, which maybe you're actually
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
I just
definitely.
interviewed Paul Harding, the guy who wrote Tinkers,
Hmm.
and he has a new one. He was just at the library too, called I think it was called Different Beauty. And he's like you. He says, I'm not so concerned with the plot. I don't do like 10 years of research. It's just the language. It's just,
Right.
and he was a former drummer in a rock and roll band. He says it's very similar to drumming for me. And I thought
Hmm.
it was fascinating
Interesting.
too.
That's really cool. I mean, personally, I want both. I want beautiful language and I want narrative drive, and I think that's what kind of drives me into genre sometimes, where
Yeah,
the plot will.
but you're non-linear.
It's
So
true. I'm non-linear, but I have detectives and time machines, so that yeah, pushes me into a different space. I love Harding's work. I think it's so beautiful.
yeah, and I always thought he would kind of be like George Saunders, and although George Saunders was a lot of fun to talk to, um, I thought he'd be more formal. And he's just a guy. He was in front of his drum kit when I interviewed him, and he's folding his towels, things like that.
I love that. If I knew that
Yeah,
was an option, I would have been folding laundry this whole time.
yeah. I said, "What are you doing?" And then we
Yeah.
decided we folded our towels the same way, which
Hmm. Hmm.
for a listener is good because you're getting into and that's what I say all the time is you're getting into your mind, which is a different way of getting into the book. And in this case,
Yeah.
we have both things going on because you are in the
Yeah.
book.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So the title Sea of Tranquility, as we come to a conclusion here, the title is, it's this peaceful title. It's what we first maybe learned about the moon. When we look up at the moon, we see it. It makes a big portion of the man in the moon.
Hmm.
Yet, where's the tranquility in the book? And yeah, is
Yeah. The title is actually very dark, and you only kind of get that in a passing reference. And I think the end of the second auto fiction section. So I had the experience that a lot of people had, which is I had a very young child when COVID-19 broke out. My daughter had just turned 4. And the project of especially those early months, but really the next 2 years, was trying to create a tranquil, peaceful home environment, while particularly in early 2020, while also magically doing your job and homeschooling and keeping this terrifying world at bay. And trying not to panic, because we didn't know what COVID-19 really meant when it first broke out, or what the effect might be on children. So, I did that. I think I succeeded. I think I was able to create this kind of peaceful, magical, tranquil space for my little girl. And I came to this weird realization very early on, which is that I gave this line to Olive in the novel, that life can be tranquil in the face of death. And that was what was required of us as parents of young children in the early days of the pandemic. Can you create a tranquil home in the face of death? That was the project. So yeah, that's what the title alludes to. It's much less peaceful than you might think, just from seeing it on the book jacket.
Yeah, the other thing about it is, 4 years old. My granddaughter was born February of 2020. So for 2 years,
Mhm.
she had no human contact. And we still have no idea what that's going to do or
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 I have a nephew in that position. Yeah, it was a sort of terrible experiment that some
yeah.
kids of that age were subjected to.
I was, how come you didn't write an epigraph? Do you think about epigraphs? Because I always think that's interesting, because always authors have to think really hard about epigraphs, because it's like
Yeah, it's true.
the outside of a jigsaw puzzle box.
It's true. Yeah, they're always an option, but I kind of like the challenge of wrapping up the whole book within the book.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mhm.
Because, well, it's the bookseller thing. I'm selling books because of their covers, and their titles. Someone opens it up,
Mhm.
the first thing they look for is the epigraph. And
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
but don't necessarily want that. You want
right.
the entire mystery of it. So what's this book tour been going to be like? Have you brought any perspective into it because of the last one and the fact that you've written extensively about it?
It's a pretty limited tour, kind of by design, because my work life is just really intense these days. So travel is hard, especially with a kid. Yeah, so what I asked for and Knopf agreed to was 5 cities, 2 of which are New York City and LA. And I kind of live in both places. I rent apartments in both cities because I'm in LA a lot for work. So yeah, it's quite small. I did Philadelphia and Brooklyn this week, and then LA's next week, and then Chicago and Madison a couple of weeks from now, and that's the entire tour. I've moved toward doing bigger events and fewer events, instead of a lot of bookstore events, and there is loss in that because I love bookstores, and it does create this kind of strange tour in a way where I'm very rarely in bookstores anymore. I'll be at a theater somewhere, and that's it's an offsite event usually, which is an amazing position to be in. I'm not complaining, but yeah, I do actually miss the bookstore tours. It's just this time where I'm working on so many projects, and travel is very difficult for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's another one of what I call a COVID paradox. I mean, authors realized all of a sudden that they don't have to drive or fly. They can have an audience that's the entire world, when they used to get 50 or 70 or 100 people. And now,
Yeah,
it's interesting that it took so long for that realization to come true. In so many ways,
yeah,
there's so
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and there was kind of a silver lining there. And I was promoting the Glass Hotel in March and April 2020,
right.
and my mom, who lives on Vancouver Island, was suddenly able to come to all my events. That would never happen in real life. So yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, more technology, more magic.
Yeah,
Well, so you work a lot in television now, so I guess that's why you're in LA, right?
yeah, exactly. I'll always write novels. I love writing novels, and I'm working on a new one. But I think COVID changed us. whether we want to think about it or not. And one thing that changed for me is I really have a desire for collaboration, which I didn't have before. There is something really fun still in the experience of closing myself in a room and writing a novel. But I also love the TV writer's room experience. It's kind of amazing. In that experience, you're in a room on Zoom or live with all these other writers, and you just kind of build a world together. And like, it's really fun. It's people who are obsessed with story. But then also there's a very practical consideration, which is, not to get into like the weeds here, but my health insurance comes from the Writers Guild of America, which is my screenwriters union. So I have to make a certain amount of screenwriting income every year or so to keep that going. So yeah, it's partly practical and partly a love of the form.
Well, the other thing you said is something that a lot of people don't say. A lot of authors say, "Oh, they ruined my work in the movie," or I'm going to take my credit off of it. And what you're saying is that different media require a different approach completely, which makes perfect sense, but no one says that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. It's something I was slow to realize, honestly. I'd certainly had the experience as a reader. I've seen a book I loved adapted to film or TV and disliking it because it was different. They changed everything. And what I've come to realize is, yeah, they changed everything because they had to. That's what it takes because different media do have completely different dramatic requirements. For me, the changes are kind of fun. It's interesting to break a story apart, see how you can make it completely different.
Plus, if you're collaborating, you do have a say.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
But you know what? Even when I don't have a say, like I had no say in the Station 11 production by choice. I chose not to be involved in that. And I love what they did. It's totally different, but it remained true to the spirit of the book.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. And so that's the other thing. And the other COVID thing is now things can be episodic. They didn't used to be. It was a movie.
Yeah.
You went.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I find limited series to be a really cool form. Just being able to tell a story in 8 or 10 hours instead of 1.5 or 2.
Yeah, we're going to see a Marvel movie or a John Wick movie where you're basically going to an amusement park now. It's just a ride.
Yeah, which I love, but yeah,
sure.
it's nice to have options.
Well, that was the good thing about what you said is that you have all these options. There's no reason to label them good or bad for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
it's true. They're just different.
well, so what do you? Well, this is the classic. I was trying not to ask any questions that are asked all the time because then I didn't want to copy what your tour was. That's why I
It's
asked.
fine. It's really fine. No, what interviewers are scared of me now because of those autofiction sections.
Right.
But honestly, like if your questions aren't crazy, you have nothing to fear. That's what I've been
Well, that's
telling
why I asked
people.
if you believe in the simulation, because no one's really going to ask you
Yeah.
that. Maybe they will. I don't
No.
know.
It's an interesting question in any event.
Yeah, it's a crucial question. Yeah, it's a crucial question for life. I mean, if you feel that, although what you're saying is you really wouldn't, it's all a simulation anyway.
It could be. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, with that, oh yeah, the question that everybody asks.
Oh
So
yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So you said you're working on something. Are we going to see some of the same people again?
Yeah, but not from the most recent books. The novel I'm working on, and it's going to be a couple of years at least, because I'm only partway through the first draft. The protagonist of my new novel is the villain from The Singer's Gun. That was my second novel that came out in 2010. So yeah, going back to an old character, but somebody we haven't seen in a while.
Are you going to be back in it too?
No.
Okay. Well, with that's a good way to conclude. You're not going to be back.
I think so. No, I don't think so. Once was enough.
Okay. Well, Emily, thanks so much for coming back to see me. Like I said, it's been 9 years. I hope it's not that 9 years again, but I really enjoyed talking to you as well.
Oh, likewise. This has been great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.